So good evening, everybody. It's finally 7:15. These clocks are a little bit fast, but I think we're all used to that by now. So welcome to our planning meeting this evening, 17th of February. Welcome to members, officers, members of the public, and also anybody watching on our YouTube channel. So we'll move on to the agenda. The first item is item 1, apologies for absence. We have one apology this evening. It's from Councillor Monday. He hasn't got a substitute, but otherwise we are all here. The next item on the agenda is declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare the existence and nature of any disclosable pecuniary interest or other registrable interest relating to items on the agenda having regard to the Code of Conduct for members? Anybody? Councillor Bowers.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I declare a non-registrable interest in item 5B, application 25014551 FUL, land north of New Street, Halstead. This is one of the residential sites owned by Braintree District Council, and as the Cabinet Member responsible for property and asset management, I've had dealings in regards to this site, nothing to do with the actual planning application, but for transparency, I'll leave the meeting for that item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers. Anybody else? Okay, no. So we'll move on to the next item agenda, item 3. This is minutes of the previous meeting. I have before me the minutes of the meeting on the 27th of January. Does anybody wish to move that I sign? Thank you. And all those in favour of approving the minutes? Thank you very much. Okay, next item on the agenda, item 4, public question time. We don't have any registered speakers under this item, so we'll now move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is planning applications. The first application for us this evening is application number 25/01282 full, which is land at Tamdown Way, Braintree. We don't have any speakers on this item, so I shall now move on and ask Jack to give us his presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. The application before us for item 1 is 25/01282/FUL, which concerns land at Tamdown Way within Springwood Drive Industrial Estate in Braintree. The proposal seeks planning permission for an industrial building which would be subdivided into...
It's coming through the mics.
Yeah. I'll continue. The proposal seeks permission for an industrial building subdivided into 2 units with associated yards, parking and office provision. So these next slides show the location within its context. Officers will be familiar, members will be familiar as well with the Springwood Industrial Estate, west of Braintree Town. This application site is towards the rear of that estate, towards its northern sections. This site gives an idea of the context. So the site is within the Braintree development boundary. The purple area on this plan shows the employment policy area which this site falls within. And importantly, to the northwest boundary of the site, which immediately adjoins, is Panfield Wood, and it's a designated ancient woodland, a local wildlife site and a priority habitat, and protected by a tree preservation order. It's this relationship which is central to the planning assessment. So this slide shows the layout. It shows the building in the dark shade of grey, which extends across the site here. It has the capability of being split into 2 units. On the left-hand side would be Unit A with its yard and parking area. To the right-hand side would be Unit B, again with its yard and parking area. The proposed elevations. Officers consider the design, scale and appearance of the building to be acceptable within its industrial estate context. The parapet system, which you can see here, creates a continuous homogeneous roof line which induces a modern industrial frontage. The materials and the colour treatment help to break up the massing and they offer a degree of articulation. Design is not a reason for refusal in this case. The proposed materials also help to standard in their palette, an aluminium cladding with blue and grey tones, standard paving materials. no objection is raised towards these materials, and these could be secured by condition. Now, with respect to the landscaping, this shows landscaping across the perimeters of the site, including structural landscaping across the right-hand side there of the building to its southeast. However, several proposed trees within this plan couldn't be delivered because of an Anglian water easement which runs through the site. Now, this could be revised, but this scheme, this plan as we see it here, couldn't be implemented, and we are unsure of the level of planting at this point that could be put in within that area. So therefore this plan here is not accepted. This plan shows the proposed drainage. Both Anglian Water and the lead local flood authority raised no objection on drainage matters, where Anglian Water have objected with regards to the planting in the easement. The yellow highlighted area shows where that easement line runs. So you can see there it implicates the landscaping on the east of the parking area on the right-hand side. The proposed lighting shows a considerable amount of lux to the boundary. Now the proposed lighting scheme that we've looked at here has 10 lux up to the boundary point, which goes down to 5 and 2.5 and then down to 1. Now, this is a light spill into the woodland area which immediately adjoins the site. And we have subsequently, but not been able to consult on a revised lighting plan which does reduce that down to generally 1 lux at the woodland edge. But again, at the date that this was submitted, we haven't been able to consult with that with our ecology advisors. But notwithstanding, we require further information such as bat activity surveys to really know the sensitivity of lighting that's required in this area in order to secure an appropriate lighting strategy. So therefore, the lighting that we've been able to consult on isn't considered acceptable. Now, in terms of site photos, this shows the relationship between the site as it is currently and the woodland edge there of Panfield Wood. At the moment, the site is largely bare ground with informal storage. You can see storage containers, and there's equipment, apparatus, etc. related to that use. Moving into the site, again, we have bare ground, and then towards the east of the site it goes to planting, evidence of earth spoil with an earth bund running through the site, and then views of the site from Tamdown Way with Panfield Wood visible there in the background. This is the woodland edge adjoining the site at its north, and this is a relationship between the property, the unit, directly north of the site and the woodland. This is a site photo taken directly across the back of the storage containers on the perimeter of the site, and this is a view from within the woodland looking back towards the site. I'll summarise this page, as I appreciate it's a lot of writing, but essentially the principle of development is acceptable and it's supported by employment policies. Within the delegated report, we've considered the benefits of employment and job creation. We consider the building design is acceptable and the internal layout of the development is acceptable. However, the site configuration places the yard and the parking area and potential light impacts, sources of disturbance, etc. directly on the boundary of Panfield Wood. Now, direct and indirect impacts to ancient woodland must only be accepted in wholly exceptional circumstances, and we do not consider that the proposal provides that justification. The landscaping is in conflict with Anglian Water's easement, so we can't deliver the landscaping proposals that we have, and currently we don't have certainty that an alternative level of structural mitigation required could be secured. Furthermore, we've been advised by the Highways Authority that financial contributions would be required for obligations to improve the Podsbrook Rain Road roundabout due to known congestion issues, etc. However, as the application has been refused on separate grounds, these obligations, discussions of haven't been advanced, but they would be conditional on any approval. So the overall summary is that officers take into account the benefits arising from the proposal, the social and economic benefits and the policy support from the local plan. However, the harms to the ancient woodland and the ecological harms, we don't consider the benefits outweigh those particular harms, as well as the landscape and obligation points I've talked about. We consider that similar benefits could be achieved on an amended layout within the site, which does avoid this harm. This could be a reduced scale, reconfiguration, etc. But that would be beyond what we could secure as a simple revision to the scheme. We think a further, more comprehensive redesign would be required. So as a result, in the absence of those, in the potential for that alternative, the impacts that we've identified here appear to be unjustified, and we couldn't support, or officers couldn't advise the members to support the application. So therefore it's recommended that planning permission is refused for the reasons that are set out within Appendix 1. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack, for that clear report and clear plans. Members, who would like to kick off on this one? Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's good to see the care officers have taken to consider this woodland, which ticks all the boxes. So priority habitat, well, woodland are by definition, but it's also a local wildlife site. Ancient woodland, which means it existed before 1600 and also covered by a TPO. So obviously it needs to be protected. I mean, the equivalent for a listed building would be a very high designation. What concerned me from the photographs is the lack of care that's already extant along the woodland boundary, the waste, the poor boundary treatment. So I think it's absolutely right that we do everything we can to protect this woodland. And I have to say tonight, and I'll keep saying it, the damage being caused by developers to our nature stock, our nature heritage is immense. We've just lost another 500 yards of mature hedge in Rivenhall in the last week. And this is going on all the time. So defending sites like this is really, really important. What I'm interested in, though, is in particular in this site, is the two specific reasons for refusal are the very high lux bill. 10 lux is extremely high. As I've said before, 1 lux I don't think is correct. I mean, okay, it's a benchmark, but 1 lux is still 4 times as bright as the brightest winter full moon the UK gets. And much brighter than a summer full moon, and I know that's what we assess against because that's what place services say, but I think it should be lower. However, that said, 10 lux is way over that. It's the sort of lighting level you'd get in the middle of a town under a street light. It's very, very bright. So clearly that has a lot of potential to harm protected species, particularly bats. But I have to say, I've seen other applications before this authority where we've not taken the same approach of high light spill into woodland areas and refusing because we haven't got an ecological survey. So I just wonder why that is, because I think we should have a consistent approach. In terms of the site itself, obviously it lends itself to this type of development. I think that's right, what officers have said there. So a scheme could come forward, but not this scheme that goes right up against the woodland and causes this harm. If it was set back, smaller scale, had really good quality controls on the lighting, an appropriate buffer, I think it's 15 metres officers are looking for, that could be a different ball game. So I think officers have got this absolutely right. We're not saying something might not be appropriate in the future, but this is not appropriate.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Anybody else like to contribute to this? Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. I agree with most of what Councillor Abbott has said. I think there definitely could be something done on this site, but just not this proposal. I think it would be good if they came back with something probably less ambitious, different configuration, something that doesn't damage the landscape and impact on the ancient woodland. I think it's disappointing to see on the photographs that we've been sent how much stuff there is on the site. Numerous containers, piles of building materials. It looks, it looks scruffy to be honest. It's not great, and I do think that's very disappointing. So yeah, I agree. I think officers have got it absolutely right on this one. But it would be good to see something come forward that we could support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spray. Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For all the reasons that my colleagues have just spoken about, I think one of the issues that we've got here is that we are dealing with an existing area that has been subject to some previous poor planning policy, whereby we haven't been able to introduce a buffer that's of an adequate distance in this case, and unfortunately we can't rein back on that. You can see from the pictures that we've seen here tonight, it really is a hard finish and a hard start to the woodland compared to where the land is. And I think a reconfiguration of this site is going to be the only way to try and lessen any impact. I mean, we need to be fairly honest with ourselves here. There is going to be an impact. It's just about how much we can lessen that with as much thought and care into the planning application, which I don't doubt will come before us again at some point in a reconfigured way, and hopefully it will find acceptance within this team. Just to the point that Councillor Abbott made, I don't think I've ever seen an application whereby we have been this close to any woodland, ancient or otherwise. I do accept we have accepted and approved some applications, but there has been at least some buffer between the edge of the boundary and where the woodland starts, without it being so hard up against it here. But with anything that does come forward, I'm pretty sure all of us would like to see something a bit more thoughtful that can allow at least some consideration of where the woodland starts. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Shear?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Could I just ask a question to officers? Because as Councillor Ricky has just mentioned about the hard stop between the ancient woodland and the potential boundary, and it seems that officers are clear and in agreement about where the boundary exists and the potential for any development. It's just that boundary treatment, because I noticed that there is not much of one-on-wire fencing, which I would consider as quite allows light. It's quite dangerous for all sorts of fauna as well. That would there be do we know if Natural England or any other organisations would consider a hard stop of a wooden fence at 2.5 metres tall is effective to, one, reduce light, but allow nature to crawl along the back without moving in towards a development industrial area like this, and it would also have the advantage of helping soundproofing and being dark as well. So I just like to ask that question.
Yeah, so the advice that we've got from our college officers is they start by looking at a functional buffer of about 15 metres between the proposed development and the woodland edge. And then at that point in 15 metres, we could consider suitable boundary treatment. And my understanding is any encroachment within that would require significant justification, given that the NPPF says that it's not just loss of ancient woodland, it's deterioration, and it specifically talks about the woodland edge. So 15 metres would be the starting point, unless there was a clear and unequivocal reason. But at the moment, I would say 15 metres. We could consider acoustic boundary treatment, planted boundary treatment, or planting on the other side of the boundary. You know, there's multiple ways we could probably think about it, but as an officer, I'd need to consult with our ecology officer and any relevant Natural England guidance and best practice to be able to say this would be sort of the model approach. But from what I can say is the 15-metre functional boundary buffer zone is what I've been advised, and then from there on we can consider the buffers on the site side and any compensatory planting or strengthening on the other side. But we have to be careful with any planting close to the ancient woodland, because we don't want to introduce any species which then begin to compete on the woodland edge. So it's a level of sensitivity, but I'd need to take advice from the ecology officer, but yeah, hopefully we can do that in due course.
Thank you, Jake. Councillor Bowes-Flint.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Can I ask if there was a pre-app done on this site application?
Not with
Okay.
officers and myself.
That may have been an advantage, because to be fair to Tamdown, they're a big employer in this district and they've been here many years, so it's a shame that they didn't take that opportunity up. First of all, can I ask, and I know the nature of their business, so with the wood, and with the woodland and these containers, is there any enforcement action we can take to have them moved away from the boundary?
My instinctual reaction would be with storage containers, quite a peculiar part of the plan system where they're not necessarily buildings as so much as their uses, and provided that use is consistent with the designated use of the area, sometimes they can be lawful and such not to constitute development. So we'd certainly have to have a look at it, but to manage expectations, whether we could require their removal would be something that we'd have to look into. If it were the case that they were deemed permanent and required permission to regularise, we'd have to consider how long they've been on the site, continuous or not. So I can't give you a straightforward answer, but we would have to look into it, is what I think I could say.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I guess that would be the answer. However, if you look at the photos provided, they do seem as though they've been there for quite a long while, and it's just a shame that they've got there where they are, basically. But the other thing that I would ask of officers is that this basically doesn't meet perhaps the criteria that we would expect for more than one reason. However, I note what you said about the county would want a contribution towards the junction work at the roundabout with Podsbrook and that. Can I just ask that if in future any negotiations are taken about, then we do stipulate with county that that money is actually spent on that junction, because all I've heard for the last 10 years is that we are working on it. We are working on it. And that is an absolute nightmare. It takes at least half hour to 3/4 of an hour to get off there from 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And it isn't right that everybody who works on there then has to spend an hour trying to get off of an estate, to get on the road, to get home. It's one of the worst junctions we've got in the town. So can I make sure, because I know how county work, and I would just stipulate that money, if it is asked for, if it does get that far, is spent on that actual junction. Thank you.
Yeah, I think just there's 2 points. Just on your first point, regards to storage containers, I think the developer is looking to bring the site forward. So hopefully, if we can get that, it sort of solves the two birds with one stone analogy. But the second point, with county, is it would be conditional within the section 106 that money has to be spent in that way. So.
That's Richard. Did you want to come back?
Just very briefly, and it's a bit of a moot point given what Jack's just mentioned, but if you do look at the satellite pictures, those storage containers have been put across the boundary end to end, so there's very little way that they're being used as storage containers, because you can't even get into them because of the way they've been placed. So if we are seeking to regularise that, then I'm pretty sure it could be enforced with a fair assumption that they're not being used for the intention of storage. Thank you.
Okay, I don't think anybody else wants... Oh, Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. Just very briefly, Madam Chairman. Back to the theme of consistency, I'm aware of sites where planning enforcement has been taken against shipping containers, and a garden where it wasn't, and is now considered to be an ancillary structure in the garden. That's what I was told. So again, we need to be consistent. On the point about 2.5 metre high fence, bats fly considerably higher than that, and one of their main favoured places for feeding is along tall hedges and woodland margins. I mean, they will fly at way higher than 2.5 feeding, so you might be able to stop some of the light going into the lower part of the wood, but you'd still have a dramatic effect on the bat foraging routes.
Thanks, Councillor Abbott. Points noted. Right, would anybody like to move officer's recommendation? Councillor Holland?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to move officer's recommendation as set out in the report.
Find a seconder. Councillor Spray.
I'll second.
Thank you. And all those in favour of officer's recommendation to refuse this application? Right, that is unanimous. Thank you very much, members. So let Councillor Bowers leave the room. And now we'll move on to the next item, which is item 5B on the agenda. This is application number 25/01451 full. This is at land north of New Street, Housestead. It starts on page 53 on your agenda. We do have a speaker this evening on this, who is Mr. Adam Jackson. If you'd like to come to the table and press the button on the microphone, and you've got 3 minutes to give your statement. Thank you.
Good evening, Lady Chair, members of the committee. My name is Adam Jackson from Grow Design Studio, and I'm speaking as agent on behalf of the applicant LPB Homes for the proposal at land north of New Street, Housestead. Thank you for the officer's report and the recommendation. We're grateful for the time officers and consultees have put into the application, and I'd like to keep my comments focused on the main planning points. This is a small 4-dwelling scheme on a previously developed site within Housted's development boundary and in a sustainable location close to local services. In principle, this is exactly the type of site that national and local policy encourages us to make effective use of. Members may be aware there was a previous scheme that was withdrawn, and we've worked carefully to respond to the concerns that were raised at the time. The current design is deliberately more in keeping with New Street and the edge of the conservation area setting, with varied roof forms, traditional materials, better articulation and details that reflect local character. Officers conclude it's a high quality addition to the street scene, and the historic building consultant is comfortable with the impact on the conservation area setting, subject to conditions controlling materials and detailing. On the practical matters residents often worry about, highways and parking have been assessed and Essex Highways raised no objection. Each home has 2 parking spaces and meets visibility display requirements. Fire access is acceptable, and importantly as well, the waste collection arrangements have been amended so that the carry distance is within the required limits. Trees and ecology are understandably sensitive here because of the strong relationship to the public gardens and the established tree belt. The scheme has been revised alongside updated arboricultural information to reduce the impact and make protection measures clearer. Officers acknowledge there are details to finalise, particularly around the tree protection, working space and landscaping, but those matters can be secured by robust pre-commencement conditions. And officers also flag the option of tree preservation order to safeguard the retained frontage trees long term. On ecology matters, officers confirm there is sufficient information to determine the application and mitigation measures can be secured. The site is within the RAMS zone of influence and the RAMS contribution has already been paid. Biodiversity net gain will also be dealt with through the required BNG plan via condition. Finally, on neighbour relationships, the layout has been adjusted to address Brook Place in particular, with increased separation and clearer arrangements that officers consider acceptable. Construction impacts are temporary and will be managed by condition. In summary, this is a policy-compliant brownfield scheme with a revised design that officers consider sympathetic and high quality, and with no technical objections that can't be dealt with through the recommended conditions. We respectfully ask members to support the officer recommendation and approve the application this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I'll let you run over as we haven't got any other speakers this evening. So I'll now move on to the officer presentation, which is also going to be given by Jack. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Chair. So next item, 25/01451/FUL, which for the erection of 4 dwellings, 2 detached and 2 semi-detached, on land north of New Street in Housestead. So this is a council-owned site, hence why the application is before the committee this evening. So location plan shows the site in its context. Now, within the site, it appears the building footprint is indicated, which has subsequently been removed, so that footprint of building isn't currently within the red line. The land is situated just south of Housestead Town Centre, which is just northeast of this image. It's within the defined development boundary and directly adjoins the Housestead Public Gardens. The site's surrounded by established residential properties and is in what officers consider a highly sustainable location with easy access to services, facilities and public transport. The satellite image shows the relationship between the public gardens to the east and south for existing properties across New Street and Brook Place to the east. The site was formerly occupied by Age UK buildings, which were demolished in 2016. The photographs show the site from various viewpoints, so the land is currently open, mostly cleared, and enclosed by mature trees along its frontage and boundaries. The tree belt along New Street is particularly prominent, if I show you here. And these images show the close relationship between the site and the public garden, and that's a view of the trees from within the site. Along the New Street is typical varied neighbouring development on the fringe of the conservation area. There's a varied mix of Victorian villas, semi-detached and terraced properties. Diversity is reflected within the proposed design, which we'll come on to, which adopts similarly traditional forms, elevations and materials. So the existing block plan shows the current site with its trees on its perimeter. Officers have included the previously withdrawn scheme for context. This shows 4 properties in that sort of staggered linked terrace arrangement across the site. And by comparison, this is the proposed block plan, which shows greater spacing within the site. The buildings have been moved away from the frontage of the site and has improved the separation from neighbouring dwellings to the east. These slides show the detailed elevations and floor plans for each dwelling. So this is plot 1, the internal layout. Plots 2 and 3, so 2 being a mirror of the one there, 3 being a mirror, sorry, and plot 4 being the one on the end. So the architecture adopts a traditional form and materials consistent with New Street, with recessed entrances, varied roof forms and added articulation and quality. All internal layouts meet nationally described space standards, provide adequate bedroom sizes, well-proportioned internal spaces and sufficient internal light standards. In conclusion, or in summary, the site is located within a sustainable location within the town development boundary of Housestead. Officers considered the proposal to be of a high quality addition to the street scene and sympathetic to the adjacent conservation area. There's been no highways objection received and there's adequate off-street parking proposed within the site. No significant adverse impacts on neighbouring amenity and a good level of amenity for future occupiers. There is some encroachment close to and within route protection areas. However, in consultation with the Council's tree officers and landscape services team, it's considered that these can be managed effectively by condition, which have been agreed, which could secure full and final details, I believe say, of tree protection and mitigation measures. So it is recommended that planning permission is granted in accordance with the approved plans and documents and subject to the conditions and reasons within Appendix 1 of this item. I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'm presenting this on behalf of the case officer, but I'm able to address any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack. Councillor Beavis, I saw your hand first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I know the site well and I do remember it in its previous form as well. And I think this is certainly a better scheme and a lot more, I thought, attention to detail in terms of the actual historic look at the properties as well. I'm a bit confused by Housestead Town's comment at 8.1.1 where they say that they raise no objections to the application, but they'd like to understand further the historic nature of the plot. That doesn't really make sense to me, that sentence doesn't make sense. Does that mean that they would like to, that they do understand the historic nature of the plant. I don't really quite understand what they mean by that, because I mean, Housestead Town Council would know that site so well as well. So I'm just a bit confused. I mean, I do know the historic nature of the site. I just wondered what you took from that. Because also when you look at the public comments as well, because there's been quite a few public comments on this, they also raise as well about the historic nature. Thank you, Chair.
I'll do my best to answer the question.
I do know what the historic nature is, by the way.
Yeah, my understanding from looking at the officer's report and then available evidence is that it was occupied by Age UK. There seemed to be a communal use of the building. It looked to be of a sort of pavilion type architecture, which was removed in 2016. As to historic uses, but beyond that, I wouldn't be able to answer. But I suppose the key would be that there's currently nothing on site, and yeah, it's proposed for development. So I'm happy if there is particular historic nature, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I could just add a little context to that as well. In terms of the phraseology of the actual comment as well, we do get that sometimes where we get something that's framed as a no objection and there's a bit of commentary behind it, and it can be slightly confusing, but our headline is always, is it an objection or a no objection? If they state clearly at the start what their position is, then if they put a kind of afterthought, there's not too much we can do about that. As long as they've stated their position clearly, that's what we'll go with. So I don't think we can fully answer what their thought process was behind that.
Councillor Finken.
Yes. Obviously, I wasn't in the room when it was discussed by the Town Council because I always leave the room. But I suspect that some councillors would be thinking of what was on the site previous to the building of the what was originally a servicemen's building during the war, and later became a community centre and a senior citizen centre, and that the whole of that area, part of which is now a children's playground, part of which was an informal garden made on the old tennis courts and so on, and this site as well, were all considered part of the public gardens. So I think that's really what well, I guess, you know, without having spoken to any of the other councillors, that they might be referring to. But I think really all that is irrelevant. It's a derelict site. It's a complete eyesore. Even though it was only demolished only 10 years ago, it was closed, you know, years before that. And it's just been in a terrible state for all these years. So I think the people living in the area, as well as the residents of Housestead generally, will be really relieved and pleased to see that a viable plan has come forward to develop the site. This is a far better proposal than the previous one, far more appropriate. The design and style of the houses is very suited to New Street, which, as you say, has a variety of different housing, but obviously Edwardian, Victorian, and so on. So it needs to fit in with that architecture. And I think, you know, the fact that it's a high quality design, much more suited to the site than the previous proposals were. It's just a shame that it's taken so long for us to get to this stage, really. But I think we should be supporting it, and obviously we can ask questions about sustainability. You know, will it have solar panels, for example, or you know, heat producing measures and that sort of thing. But in terms of the general design, I think, and the protection of the trees is very important. The landscaping is important. But I think you know, we should be supporting this proposal and the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Finken. Councillor Spray.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I too remember the building that was there. It was a community centre used by Age Concern, as they were then, and then that charity merged with Help the Aged and became Age UK. And I know that because I used to work for Age Concern back in the day, in and around Housestead. The community centre was much loved by the people who used it, but by the time it came down in 2016, I think it was, it really was no longer fit for purpose, and hadn't been for a while. But yes, it would be really good, as Councillor Finken has said, for something to happen on the site. Personally, I like the proposed designs. I think they will fit in well with the existing properties along New Street. It is a really sustainable location. It's a short walk to the shops, the centre of the town. I don't know if the occupants will be able to access the park from the rear of the site. In some ways, it would be nice if they could to walk through the park to get to the town, although I appreciate there might be security concerns about that. I don't know if that's, I couldn't tell from looking at the photos, the designs we had, whether that was possible. But either way, it's a very short distance to all the services that the town offers. So yeah, I think it's a very suitable proposal, and yeah, it would be very good to see the site tidied up and some good use made of it. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Spray. Next person is Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I agree with almost everything that's been said previously. And yeah, this is a brownfield site, urban settings, the sort of site we should be looking at to build housing on, in preference to having more building out into the countryside. My one question picks up from what Councillor Finken said, and it was a comment officers made about the trees. They said something to the effect of, I've written it down here, that the losses of trees are ambiguous. In other words, they weren't sure from what the developers had submitted how many trees were coming out. But in the report, we don't have, normally we have a schedule. If trees are coming out, it'll say group this, tree that. We don't have that. So is that an erroneous comment, or are there trees coming out? And if there are, why aren't they listed?
For obviously full disclosure, I didn't write the report, so I can't speak for the, the reasons behind the drafting. I think that having looked at the case, it came from comments from the landscape services team that said generally it's understood, but it wasn't clear where some trees were grouped, whether they were individual trees, group trees. Essentially, what they were looking for was further clarity through a tree protection plan, an AMS, tree retention plan, etc., to sort of, well, for officers to consider the exact extent of tree loss and whatnot at the application stage. And obviously, the plans do show a considerable amount of tree retention, so that would be officers' expectation. But as to why individual tree types and groups weren't set out, I wouldn't be able to answer that question myself. But from reading the officer's report, I'd be satisfied that a considerably comprehensive approach is going to be taken by a condition, and that would be what I could say.
If I could just come back, well, I'm not sure about that, because I agree that if we're talking about root protection areas and any minor pruning that might be needed doing, that can be covered by condition. But if we're talking about approving a development where big trees are coming out, but we haven't been told what they are and how many, we can't assess overall impacts. So I don't know if there's any information officers can. Sorry to delay the meeting, but it just struck me as a bit like the comment from the town council. You end up thinking, oh, what's that about? And that's what that triggered in my mind.
No, it's a fair point. See, Tim is also looking through the report.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. We're just looking through it because, to be blunt, I'm in agreement. There is a bit of confusion. There's a condition 7 that clearly talks about the ARB method statement, and then talks about retained trees to be removed, etc. And then there's a section in the report that talks about trees and the impact on trees, but it's not 100% clear. So it's quite difficult for us to answer, not being the case officers. But I wonder whether perhaps we might take this and get some more information and bring it back if it's that key a point, because I don't think we can give you a clear answer, and it is slightly that sentence is slightly unclear. So I'm sorry we can't be clearer than that, but it's difficult for us, having not written the report, to offer detailed commentary on that.
Could I ask, Tim, whether you feel that condition 7 and I think that's condition 15, are they adequate to cover these concerns that Councillor Abbott has, as condition 16 actually, that he's raised, or do you feel it does need to come back to committee?
I think 7, I'm just scrolling down to 16, I think 7 is too generic. I don't think it offers, because it talks about trees to be lost and trees to be retained. It doesn't actually set out the exact figures, so I'm not so comfortable with that one. I was just going to have a quick look at 16. Thanks, Sarah.
That's the retained tree protection.
I think again our consensus would be that's talking about retained tree. I think it would benefit from just a bit more investigation, so we can come back to members with a clearer answer on that. Because I don't think we can give you one.
Yeah.
Okay, I now have Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think it's a good point that's been highlighted this evening around the tree preservation plan for the site. We're a little bit unsighted and unclear. It wasn't until Councillor Abbott brought it up that I think it's a point that we need to consider. So before I just mentioned something else about that, what I was going to say is that this is the type of site that we should be approving because it's a brownfield site, and albeit it does offer limited housing stock. I mean, it's only delivering 4 units. It is still 4 units. So in the context of housing delivery in Housestead, we need to be approving sites like these. I do like the palette that's been set out for it. There is that distinct nod there to the courthold housing of old along that street, which is very prominent and predominant across New Street and the street in front of that Kings Road. So I do think that this iteration is far better than the previous one that was withdrawn. With what's being said about the tree preservation, the tree issue, but also bearing in mind that the applicants brought this tonight for to try and get a way forward and a decision. If we are going to defer this, then I think we should expedite something that comes back to this committee pretty quickly, so that there's no unnecessary delay. And if we can adopt that approach, then I would be happy to move a short deferral for the next planning committee, where we can just have that line updated and swiftly added to the pack, and then we can then make our informed decision.
Thank you. Before I just move to, I think Sarah would like to come in on that.
Thank you. Whilst we're happy to do that and clarify if need be, I would just draw to your attention that you're not in a conservation area here, and there aren't any TPO trees on the site, so tree removal could be done without permission. So just bear that in mind in terms of the weighing up in the balance, the extent of the tree loss. I think the objection, my reading of the report is that the objection relates to the previous scheme raised concerns regarding tree loss. And you have got the controls, that there'll be more detailed method statement being provided.
Councillor Bowes-Flint.
Well, Madam Chairman, I was going to move, but I think Councillor Abbott would be unhappy with that. I need to get my head around this really, because I don't think any of us want to see any removal of trees unnecessarily, but also it's not fair on the applicant that they're now being held up because of the misunderstanding of the report. However, then the head of planning tells us that there's not a TPO on there anyway. So what you're saying is that they could technically take the trees out anyway, and we wouldn't have any say in it, basically. So I'm now confused. So I'm not going to move anything yet now. I'm backing off and letting others speak first.
Councillor Beavis and then...
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I've listened really carefully to comments that have been made this evening, and appreciate, yes, It is a brownfield site, and these are just the sort of sites that we should be looking at. And I also take on board the point that Sarah made actually about these trees, and one begs the question that if there aren't TPOs on them, then why aren't there TPOs on them? And the other thing I will say is this, and I know the town pretty well, and actually it is a very unique and beautiful part of the town, and we as a district council put a lot of money into maintaining and enhancing the public gardens. It is beautiful, and we have festivals in that area, and you know, when you look at that site as we've seen on the screen, there are some pretty spectacular trees there, and I really do think that we should look at a deferment. I would support that, Councillor Ricky, and get this back ASAP. Yes, it is a bit irritating, but actually, don't we have a duty to think about the site? Because I can tell you something, that if we don't get this right, it will be on the front page of the House Gazette, and that's not good for us as a council. And also just on that, I do take on board the point that I know the history of the site, I know exactly what was there, and I'm not even convinced that we've been sympathetic to that either, in terms of, you know, is there going to be a naming for the place that represents what was previously there? Because we do that all around Housedale with the Courtauds. It's a very historic place, and I think we need to think very carefully before we decide to, you know, determine this on policy, when we could defer for a short period of time and bring this back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Well, to come back on what the officer said, most trees aren't protected. The vast majority of trees in this district have no protection whatsoever. So we could extend that to any site. And we are often in the hands of developers and their, I won't say morality, but their view on whether it is worth keeping trees. In this case, clearly, we've seen the photographs, there's some very substantial trees on that site, and I'm sure I saw somewhere in the report, it talked about a possible TPO. So that is in the mind of officers in the report. I can't remember, I didn't write it down, but I'm sure it's in there.
I've got that written.
And I think what Councillor Ricky said is absolutely right. We're not asking here to kick this back 6 months. We're asking for a short deferment to get it right. And the final point I say is we are required to take all material considerations into account. That's what planning law says. We can't judge this against our own policies or the NPPF unless we understand the site. That's a generic thing in planning. And as things stand, we don't fully understand if trees are coming out or not. So I think we're duty bound, actually. If we were talking about a few self-sown sycamores, that's one thing, but we're not. We're talking about substantial street trees. So I think we're duty bound to defer for as short a period as possible, get the information and then make a decision.
Next person wanted to speak is Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Above all of the arguments that I've heard here this evening, when I looked at this proposal, it's very clear to me that this is a huge step in terms of architecture forward from what was presented before, which had no sympathy for place at all. Now, one of the things that's true here is that it adjoins a place where amenity and the generation of well-being from that is first and foremost. That's the purpose of the place to a very great extent. And so amenity is hugely important. The amenity benefit, I know there are environmental and all sorts of benefits from trees, which people have heard me bang on about before. But in this case, it's the amenity benefit of it, which is also super important in my view. And that's why TPOs are used. It's to support the wider benefit to society that specific trees give in specific places. So as far as I'm concerned, we need to make sure we've absolutely nailed, and I personally would hope protected, the trees so that the amenity benefit of these rather fine-looking trees in this particular setting is protected. And for me, that is not an issue of whether it's within a conservation area or not. I can assure you I can point to some quite ludicrous conservation areas around East Anglia, but in this particular case, this is important, and somebody's done a really good job of making this development, or what's proposed here, look right. From an amenity point of view, that, to my mind, is what the issue over the architecture is about. So I'm very much supportive of the idea of deferring this, just to get it right and to make sure not only that those trees are, in my view, they should be protected, but also that the arboricultural plan makes sure that nothing's going to happen to them, not only to prevent them being removed, but also to make sure they have a long life ahead of them. In other words, we don't want something happening during the development process which compromises those trees and leads to a long demise. That also is important. Personally, I think this is a very attractive area of a town which has huge potential, and I certainly think that we should do what we can to make sure we get it right, and that's absolutely not to try and delay this, because if we could do this in a month, I'd be personally very happy, and I'm sure everybody else would. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm just going to let Councillor Ritchie come back, and then also Councillor Bowers-Flint, and then I probably will make some decisions.
Thank you. I'll just think, just to be fair to the developer, obviously we don't know what they might be planning to do. In which case I think it's only right that we have that pause just to find out what they are going to do. Because they might come back to us and say, we're not taking any trees out. We might just cut some back or make some allowances. Because if you look at the block plan on the presentation that we had this evening, the indication on there is that the trees are going to be there. Obviously that doesn't mean to say that they would be there once granted permission, but you'd like to think that actually as part of their plan they have thought reasonably about that. But I think that's what we want to know. So therefore I think it's only fair that everyone shares that information and we can make an informed decision. Thank you.
Councillor Bowers-Flint.
Madam Chairman, just before I move deferment, we may have the answer in the room. The agent sitting in the room, may we break protocol and just ask him if there's any trees going to be removed?
I'm not sure that I'd be that comfortable doing it if the information we were approving was uncertain. So we'd be taking the word as opposed to the approved documents.
Okay. I don't believe there are going to be any trees removed, but I'm just trying to help because it's not his fault that this is being deferred. Thank you. So I'll move deferment.
Okay. Right, that has been moved in forward. Second, that we would defer this on the, and I would say that's on the proviso we try and get this back and to the next committee agenda in 3 weeks' time. Obviously, it will have to be a short. It will be a short, very short presentation. All those in favour of deferral? That is unanimous. Thank you, members. So yes, so that application has now been deferred until we get clarification on the tree proposals, tree removals, tree plan. So we'll now move on to, in fact, we're now going to move on to the next two items. They are item number 5C on your agenda. This is application number 25/02388. It's a section 106A application. This is land west of Braintree. We also have another, the item following that is item 5D on your agenda. It's application number 25/02825 and another section 106A. This is at Towerlands, Panfield Road, Braintree. And members, I'm going to ask the officer to give a presentation on both of these items. So we have one joint presentation, but I've been advised by governance that we need to have a separate debate and a separate vote on each application. So we'll proceed. We don't have any speakers now, so we'll proceed with the joint presentation, which will be given by Tim, and then we will have a debate about the first item, which is land west of Braintree. Okay, thank you, Tim.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. If you just bear with me, we're just sorting out an IT issue with the connection, so just be 30 seconds or so. Thank you. So, as the Chair's just said, this is going to be almost a double presentation. The first one's a bit longer and the second one's shorter. I'll try and keep them as concise as I can, but clearly this is quite a complex pair of applications. So there are certain details that I do need to take you through, and obviously I'm aware that you will have familiarised yourself with the report. So to start with, we're looking at the Section 106A application that relates to Panfield Lane site on the edge of Braintree. I'm not going to go through the description verbatim, but I will take you through it in a way that's easier to follow. But suffice to say that the site has a planning consent in place, and the bottom section of that description is the changes that the developer is seeking, the amendments that they're seeking with regard to their Section 106 agreement. Okay, so site location plan, members will obviously be familiar with it, but just a very quick recap. Key points to note are that the application site is outlined in red, but to the north of it, immediately adjacent, is the Towland strategic site. So we've got the two strategic sites next door to each other. We have Panfield Lane running down the eastern boundary of the site, and then over to the southwest here we have Springwood Drive, which leads into the industrial estate. Brief recap on the history. In March 2020, planning permission was granted for the Panfield site. There was a Section 106 agreement attached to that. The current proposal is to vary this agreement. The aim and the whole reason that this has been brought before you is to enable the delivery of the link road. The consented scheme was for up to 825 dwellings. It had just under a hectare of business or employment use, 2.3 hectares for a neighbourhood centre, 2 hectares for a primary school, and up to 2.8 hectares for 88 hectares for a community sports facility. So an overview plan. The important things here are, firstly, the position of the link road. We'll be referring to the link road a lot, but it's this arm here, so I hope you can see my cursor. It's this L-shaped section of road here, leads Panfield Road here, and it joins Springwood Drive here. Secondly is the Towland site, which is in green, that immediately abuts the Panfield site that we're currently looking at. So they're the two key points to note. The zoomed in version on this one, the link road, you can see that same L shape, it's just zoomed in a bit to show its structure. And then immediately adjacent to it, the planning consent that's in place for this site was a hybrid consent. So for the bulk of the site, it was an outline consent, meaning that reserved matters would have to follow. But for this section, phase 1, it was a full consent. So there is a detailed consent which covers both these houses, this housing layout, and the link road which sits next to them. So I'm just going to take you through briefly the schedules that are being changed and just add a little bit of context where we think at officer level it's needed. So to start with Schedule 2, the community sports facility. What's proposed here is the removal of the requirement to transfer this land to BDC and instead the provision of an off-site financial contribution of £463,424 for community sports purposes with an outdoor sports focus within the Braintree Bocking area. Separately to that, it's recommended that the amended Section 106 requires the landowner, the developer, to submit for approval a scheme for the provision of sports facilities on the sports land that will be retained on the site to BDC prior to 2 trigger points, the occupation of 67%, approximately 553 dwellings, and then to deliver that scheme prior to the occupation of 85%, 701 of the dwellings. So in other words, the sports land would remain on the site, but it would be for private use, and instead of it being transferred, there would be a financial contribution. A specific point that I just wanted to address on here was the Sport England objection. So there's a few issues here that we wanted to run through. Firstly, they use their generic calculator, which is based on exactly that, a generic situation. It's not site specific. So their objection is that what we're asking for is £463,000 rather than what they've asked for. So if we go to the 2 different categories, we've got the indoor sport contribution where they're asking for £923,000 or just over that. The officer view on that is that it can't be justified. When you actually look back at the original Section 106 agreement, the level of contribution that would be required would go way beyond what's actually commensurate to what we would have achieved had that land been handed over to us. So that's quite important. And the reason it's particularly important is because we've got an existing planning permission here that's been implemented. So although no houses are being delivered on this site, the consent's been implemented and it's therefore valid permanently. So the fallback position is important. The outdoor sports, Sporting have asked for 1.196 million, and we've asked for 463,000. So the question is why, and the answer is because their calculator works by calculating out the cost of providing the pitches for open sports, and then the cost of providing the changing rooms with the pitches. We essentially don't need the money for the changing rooms. The Braintree Local Football Facility Plan, which is produced by the Football Foundation, identifies a new 3D artificial grass pitch in the Braintree town area as being a priority project. The most likely sites for this additional pitch already have changing facilities. So on that basis, we don't have grounds to ask for money for changing rooms that we already have. So that's the reason why Sport England are asking for a different quantity based on a generic, not a site or situation specific quantity. So what we've done is looked at what, if you remove the changing rooms, what are we left with? What contribution is actually required for the sports pitches, which is what we would be providing, and that's for 463,424. So in other words, we've asked for what we're able and justified to ask for, and where something is generic and not justified, we've recommended that it's not asked for. Moving on to the employment contribution, and this is the second one that I just wanted to run through in a bit more detail. So the high level, the developer's applying for the deletion of the schedule and the removal of the requirement for a 2.925 million contribution towards employment. There have been significant material changes since the original 106 was agreed, and the original employment land on the site is not required. This is reflected in the policy position and the established and the emerging BDC evidence base, which I'll briefly run through in a moment. Because of this, it's very clear to us that the employment contribution doesn't meet the SIL test or critically serve a useful purpose, which is the test for this particular type of application. So very briefly, if I run through the history, the policy position and the evidence base. The history, the Employment Initiative's contribution was to specifically have been used for measures and initiatives to provide and promote employment opportunities in the area. If we go back to the start, the core strategy in 2011 allocated this site for a growth location for a mixed-use development for up to 600 new homes and 15 hectares of land for employment use. At that time, the council didn't anticipate that further significant urban extensions would be required during the plan period. The MPPF was then published, which, as members I'm sure will recall, significantly changed the housing need and housing numbers within the district and the way that we were required to allocate sites at quite a rapid pace. So because of that, we then had to look at allocating additional sites on the edge of Braintree, one of which was the Towland site, which sits next door to the Panfield site. At that time, there was already a live planning application for the Panfield Lane site, and that included 8.73 hectares of land for employment use. The problem was that when it became apparent that the adjoining site, Towlands, was about to be allocated and redeveloped for housing, officers had to revisit the Panfield Lane application, because rather than having one strategic site with employment located on the edge of it, we now had two strategic sites sitting adjacent to each other. We would have ended up wrapping housing around an employment area, which clearly is not sensible or acceptable in planning terms. They're not compatible uses. So the planning application for Panfield had to be amended, and the result was that the housing numbers jumped from 600 to 825, which was obviously a positive for housing numbers for our district, and the employment land dropped down to 0.95, just under a hectare. Simultaneously, a financial contribution of 2.925 million was secured, and that was the contribution that we're talking about today, which was to be spent on measures and initiatives to promote employment opportunities in the locality. Then we move on to the policy. Since the planning consent was granted, and planning consent was obviously then granted for the Panfield site, the adopted policy was completed, the wording was adjusted, and that policy was then put formally into place, i.e. adopted. That policy requires only a hectare of employment land on this site, so it recognised the planning consent that was in place and only requires a hectare. It doesn't require a financial contribution, and that's quite an important point. So the adopted policy position no longer requires any financial contribution. That is a material change because it means that if any scheme comes forward now on that site, as long as it provides the hectare of employment land, there is no justification for then asking for money for employment use to make up for employment land that's no longer required as it was under the core strategy. So we then move on to the evidence base, and again, this is really important. So currently, with the current adopted local plan, policy position in respect of the need for employment land has evolved. So the local plan, as I know members are aware, Part 1 was adopted in 2021, Part 2 adopted in 2022. It sets out the quantum of new development land required for the plan period. Policy SP5 addresses this specifically and states that we needed between 20.9 hectares and 43.3 hectares. So it sets out a range, which is quite common. Following this strategic land target, policy LPP2, which is the finer grain policy, allocated sites totaling 42.1 hectares. So as an authority, we moved to the top end of that range to make sure we had sufficient employment land. We then move on to the current local plan review. Again, I know members are familiar with this. In February 2025, we published our Employment Land Review, or ELR, which was produced by external consultants for us. And in April 25, the Local Plan Subcommittee approved the ELR as part of the evidence base to underpin the Local Plan Review. The ELR, or Employment Land Review, shows several important things. One is that we need 2.4 hectares of office space over the plan period. And then it also shows that we need at least 24.2 hectares, which equates to about 97,000 square metres of industrial floor space by 2041. Importantly, we've already approved developments that could provide 175,000 square metres of industrial floor space. So we're already in excess of that. But the ELR states that we should still allocate more land, so we should have a buffer and we shouldn't just sit back because we've got consents in place. The consultants considered that the sites put forward through the call for sites included 105 hectares of employment land that was suitable for development. So the ELR was indicating a really strong pipeline of permitted employment developments and a really healthy potential pipeline of more sites that are being brought forward for employment use through the local plan review. The draft local plan is proposed to allocate a further 63.9 hectares of employment land for allocation, in addition to 36.8 hectares of land being carried forward from the existing adopted plan. So I've gone through it in some detail, but the reason is all of that together represents a clear material change of circumstances to the original planning permission at the time when that section 106 was approved and put in place. The adopted policy position, the emerging policy position, and the adopted and emerging evidence base. This means that there is no longer any justification or requirement for us to secure an employment initiative contribution because we have an excess of employment land, i.e. we've met our need and we put a buffer in place. So for that reason, the officer position is that we feel this doesn't meet the SIL test and more importantly no longer serves a useful purpose, i.e. it's not required anymore. So that's the employment schedule. The next one is somewhat briefer, relates to affordable housing. This is two minor points: updating the definition of affordable housing for rent to align with revisions to the NPPF and amending the nomination rights for subsequent letting of affordable housing for rent from 100 to 75%. In summary, those are two minor procedural points that we're doing on a number of applications. Importantly, it doesn't affect any of the affordable housing in terms of percentage, quantity, etc. It's a procedural point. Okay, then if I move on to the highways, again, this is really important because this is essentially why this application's in front of you this evening. So what the developer is proposing is amendments to the timing of the provision of the new road linking Springwood Drive to Panfield Lane, the Link Road. This would do two things. Number one, it would secure the delivery of the Link Road, and number two, within a set time frame, which is absolutely crucial. So this is a key opportunity for the District Council to secure delivery of this critical piece of infrastructure. I'm just going to go through a little bit more detail on that because, again, I think it's important. So when the consent for Panfield was granted, the most important item of highway works required by the 106 agreement in terms of highway capacity in the town was the construction of the Link Road. This road was identified as critical infrastructure way back in 2011 when the Panfield Lane site was first allocated in the core strategy. So 15 years later, we're in a position where a piece of critical infrastructure is still not being delivered. The Link Road is required by the Panfield Lane 106 to be completed prior to the occupation of more than 50 dwellings on their site. It should be noted that the same restriction applies to the adjacent Towland site, i.e. they can't occupy more than 50 dwellings, and we'll come back to that point. When the Towlands planning permission was granted, it had been reasonably assumed that the Panfield Lane development would progress well in advance of the Towlands development, because the Towlands permission was issued a year after the Panfield Lane permission, and the Panfield permission included full approval of the link road and the first 189 houses, which was that phase that we saw earlier on the plan. So in other words, that had full consent, subject to conditions being discharged. That site was ready to go. Whereas Towlands was an outline consent, meaning it needed reserved matters to come forward, so it was some way behind. Unfortunately, the residential development on Panfield Lane hasn't progressed in terms of delivering houses. There are no houses built on it or occupied on it yet. The residential development on the Towlands site progressed rapidly, and as members are aware, there are dwellings, approximately 348 dwellings are occupied. So the developer for the Towlands sites breached their 50 dwelling cap and have occupied more than 50 houses, despite the link road not being in place. Again, I know you'll be aware of this. The reason they've been unable to construct the adjoining site link road was because they have no legal ability to do so. It's not on their land, it's on the adjoining developer's land, and they can't access that land and build the road. They tried to find alternative means of mitigating the impact, i.e. were there other highway works they could do, and the answer was that there isn't. So because of that and the seriousness of this piece of infrastructure, senior council officers engaged with both sets of developers, Panfield Lane applicants, which is Grange Marsh Properties and Mersey Homes, and the Towlands applicants, which is Dandara, to seek a way to bring forward the delivery of the link road. So the council's tried to assist to unlock. It was a particularly complicated situation. The new road is important because it will help provide relief to local residents that regularly experience congestion at several town centre junctions. It includes the Podsbrook Road, Rain Road and Springwood Drive roundabouts, and the junction of Rain Road, Atherick Way and Pierfit Way. Following extensive discussions with officers, an agreement's been reached between the developers of both sites, which can facilitate the delivery of the link road, and most importantly within a specified timescale. So just to set that out, Panfield Lane developers will construct the link road. They will commit to construct and make available for public use the link road within 12 months of the proposed deed of variation to their Section 106 agreement, i.e. what you're considering now, being completed. So that's a fast timescale. Or prior to occupation of more than 50 dwellings on their own site, whichever is the sooner. I think it's fair to say that what's likely to be the sooner is the 12 months of signature. It's not certain, but I think that's a fair guess. And most importantly, that's the backstop. They've only been willing to commit to this accelerated delivery timetable as a result of a private commercial agreement between themselves and the developers of the Towlands site. So between the two developers. The council's not party to this agreement. It's a private commercial agreement and it's independent of the planning process. But under the terms of that agreement, the developer for Towlands, Dandara, would pay a contribution towards the cost of constructing the link road on the adjacent Panfield site. So Dandara would pay Grange Marsh Properties and Mersey Homes contribution towards the construction of that link road, and that essentially is what's unlocked everything. On condition that the link road would be delivered by the Panfield developer within this new and set time frame. So they're tied down to deliver it within that time frame. Without the amendment to the 106 that's being put before you today, there would remain no certainty as to when the timing of the link road will be provided and open to the public, because there's no 12-month backstop, and we can't state when 50 dwellings would be, that trigger would be hit on the Panfield site. So this amendment provides both the delivery but also the certainty and timing. That's why Dandara have submitted a separate application to the council to vary their, propose to vary their Section 106 agreement, because the two have to come essentially together. They have to be considered separately, but they're unavoidably interlinked. So moving on briefly then, I'll just summarise the remaining parts. There's an additional amendment to the Highway Schedule 10. This is the removal of the ECC requirement to upgrade the footpath between Panfield Lane and Bailey Bridge Road to a footway cycleway. The reason for this is because ECC Highways themselves have stated that it's not possible to deliver it. So they requested it. When it was actually about to be delivered, they've decided it's not deliverable. The reasons they give are it's not practical to provide and maintain drainage and street lighting for the improved path, insufficient land available to construct the path to their current design standards, and concerns that the cycleway passed through a car park. So this is out of the developer's hands. The county council has said it's not deliverable. We can't, unfortunately, influence that. This one we can influence. This is a schedule to deal specifically with an adjacent portion of land, quite a small portion, where there's a live planning application for, I think, in the region of between 30 to 50 dwellings. The idea here is that if this comes before planning committee in due course and is granted, we want to make sure that we've put measures in place so that there is an obligation to put a connection between the two sites, so that these two sites aren't separated or the coach house site isn't landlocked from the other site. It doesn't have any bearing on whether or not the coach house site ever gets permission. It just means that if it ever does, there's an obligation to connect the two pieces of land. In other words, it's a sensible thing to do. There are also some minor miscellaneous adjustments which I won't go through, which are tiny technical matters, but they're set out in the officer report. So, in conclusion, officers consider that proposed changes and amendments meet the required tests of either no longer serving a useful purpose or serving the original purpose equally well following the proposed amendment. Most importantly, it would secure is the opportunity to secure the delivery of the link road, and it is therefore recommended that the proposed variation to the existing agreement be approved and a deed of variation completed in accordance with the heads of terms set out in the recommendation, subject to the contemporaneous completion of the Towlands deed of variation, which I'll present a much shorter presentation for in a moment. But the critical thing is that they would complete contemporaneously under legal supervision from our solicitors. Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll move to the next one when you're ready.
Yes, please, can you, Tim?
Okay. So, with regard to the Towlands scheme, this is the other half of the puzzle. It's simpler because the obligation or the adjustment that they're looking to make relates only to their trigger. So again, I won't go through the initial description verbatim, but underneath it identifies that it's Schedule 15 that they're looking to change, and I'll run through in just a little bit of detail exactly what they're seeking to do. Okay, so site location plan. The Towlands site outlined in red. Ignore the hatched area and the coloured land. That was from a legal agreement, but this is the site location plan. The Panfield site is where my cursor's hovering, so it's obviously abuts it. Adjoining site link road, we've seen it before, but a quick refresher, it's here, it's further down, it's in the Panfield site, not in the Towlands site that we're now considering. Site history for the Towlands site, as I said, it was granted consent in 2021, so after the Panfield site, for up to 575 dwellings. It has a section 106 attached to it, which has a 50 dwelling occupation limit until the link road on the adjacent site's been completed. Link road's located on the Panfield site, not the Towlands site, so as we've already said, the Towlands developer can't build that link road. Towlands development's proceeded at pace, Panfield site has not, so approximately 348 dwellings are now occupied on the Towlands site. They are in breach of their 106. As I said, following this and because of the seriousness of the matter, extensive negotiations have been facilitated by officers and the solution has been found. I can't emphasise enough how complex that has been to get to this point. The proposed Section 106 amendment solution for Towlands, what they are requesting is that their 106 be amended to remove the 50 dwelling occupation limit, so they be released from that cap which they have breached. They would then pay the financial contribution, which I ran through previously, across to the Panfield developer, and in return the Panfield developer would deliver the cost of the link road at an accelerated pace within the 12-month backstop from the date the agreements were signed. And as I said, it would be secured through a private commercial contract between the developers. Again, this repeats the same thing with the 12-month backstop, whichever is the sooner, but it's the 12-month backstop that's key. This then, for Towlands, the obvious benefit to them is they can continue to build out, and it removes the threat of enforcement action being taken against them by the authority. So that's their incentive to make that payment. So in conclusion, on the officer recommendation, with the new solution in place, the 50 dwelling cap would no longer serve a useful purpose from the Towlands site perspective. This is because the link road delivery would be secured through the Panfield site and within the set timescale. So on that basis, it's recommended that the proposed amendments to the Towlands Section 106 is also approved, again subject to contemporaneous completion with the Panfield Lane 106. Apologies for the length of the presentation, but I don't really see any other way around it. It's quite a complex matter. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Tim. Yes, it is complicated, and I think that was really helpful the way you took us through. And I think it was easy. I think it is easier to have had the two together, so we see how they're interlinked. So first of all, members, we'll deal with the Panfield Lane site and the proposed amendments to the section 106 for that. So who would like to start this debate? Councillor Spray.
Thank you, Chairman. Slightly surprised to be going first, but I'm happy to. And thank you to Tim for making as understandable as possible what is a really complex, situation. And I'm tempted to say, so I think I'm going to, hallelujah, because if committee can agree on this and the next one this evening, then I think it will at least start to draw to a close what has been a really, really frustrating situation. I mean, I know I get emails fairly regularly to my councillor inbox usually from ward members saying, when is something going to be done about the link road? But I don't get the number of emails that some colleagues do. And yes, I know that an enormous amount of work has gone on behind the scenes between officers, legal representatives, and the applicants. So this would appear to me to be a sensible resolution. We actually had a report to Local Plan Subcommittee recently about employment land within the district, and which does back up what is said in the report, that we do have enough employment land to meet our current and future requirements. So for me, that's not an issue, and we've had quite a lot of detail here this evening about the sports facility land as well. So all in all, I think it is a positive move forward. I'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Spray. Councillor Richard, have you next?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And likewise, I share the sentiment of Councillor Spray. This has been a long time coming. It's over close to over 10 years that this has been in the pipeline. I think it's fair to say that there's a bit of a reality check when it comes to lessons learned across how all of this has been dealt with from the outset. From a case perspective and understanding how we can ensure that Section 106 in the future is resilient enough to force the right application of that Section 106 at the time, rather than having to find ourselves here. But also just want to say to the developers, shame on you. Absolutely shame on you for holding residents of the Braintree District hostage for 10 years. I don't know if there's any representatives of either of the house builders here. I don't know if you're just representatives of whether your senior leadership team, but take the message back. What you've done to yourselves reputationally will echo in this district, and you've done nothing to align yourselves to a local planning authority where you want to build houses. So just please take that one away. Obviously, we're in a position whereby we almost need to accept what has been presented to us tonight. And thank you, Tim. So I think with regards to having to bring forward a change in Section 106, this is the third time that we've had to change one now in as many weeks, all slightly different, but I think this one is the more serious and the one that we need to give some credence to, because it does unlock not just opportunity and value, but also a long-standing promise that we have made as a council to try and help that gridlocked area of Springfield Drive, and alongside the promise of delivering houses, much needed houses to the district. But my underlying point is 10 years, over 10 years we have been waiting for this for. And over 10 years we have cumulatively lost opportunity, we've cumulatively lost employment and employers in the district. citing specifically they will not set up a business on Springfield Drive when when their employees would be subject to an hour's drive off of this estate at the end of each working day, as being one of the reasons why they wouldn't bring their businesses to the Braintree district. So on the whole, thank you, Tim, for setting out the proposals this evening. I shall wait and see what other members of this committee have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Next person I have to speak is Councillor Diamond.
Thank you, Tim, for that really informative presentation. I'd like to raise a quick question regarding pedestrian safety and connectivity from the Panfield Lane development. Am I right thinking that's this discussion, not the next one, or have I got it the wrong way around?
This one, yes.
This one, thank you very much. Given that the scheme has now developed well in excess of the originally referenced 50 dwellings, yeah, it's quite significantly, yeah, that's almost 6 times as many, and recognising that this is clearly a development attracting young families with children, it is evident that there is currently no continuous safe footpath linking the site to Panfield Lane. In light of that, can officers explain how the level of pedestrian provision is considered acceptable in planning terms? Furthermore, what mechanisms, if any, are available to the council to secure a safe and suitable walking route to the nearest bus stop and into town, reflecting the true scale and impact of the development? Thank you.
So is this actually, having said that we're appropriate to raise it now, I think that's really in relation to the Townland site, isn't it? And
I may have got a little bit confused, I do apologise.
yeah, I think it's in relation to the Townland site, and also it's not really relevant to the actual section. Is it? Maybe you could comment.
If I've
on
misunderstood,
that,
I do
yes,
apologise.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I think you said the Panfield site, and then your question related to the Towland site. I think you probably said the Panfield site because there's reference to the ECC highways. Yeah.
I do apologise for that.
So I understand the point. I mean, I think the bottom line on that is the County Council have said that what they asked for can't be delivered. So therefore, we've looked at all other options for connectivity, but we fundamentally can't ask for. There's nothing we can do to require that to be delivered.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Diamond. I appreciate it's a bit confusing. No problems. So next person is Councillor Abbott. I've got you next.
Thank you. I used a word on social media last night, Madam Chair, which I think applies to this, don't worry. Horlicks. A complete Horlicks. Can I start with a question before I continue? Because this is troubling me. So, am I right in thinking that the original obligation to build this link road was to the Towerland site? They were the ones required to build it, is that right?
Not quite. So the ones that were required to build it was Panfield, but the ones that were also restricted by it was Towlands. So Towlands had a 50 dwelling restriction, but they couldn't construct it. They just had to wait until the adjacent site built it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. No, I'm glad we clarified that from the start. Okay. So, and again, correct me if I'm wrong. So on this, on the southern side, on the Panfield Road side, we're still going to have a sports facility, but not until it's nearly finished. And there will still be some employment land, but at a reduced scale. Is that right? Or is that coming out completely?
So the employment land, there's still 0.95 hectares of it.
Yeah.
So that remains in accordance with the policy. There's still sports land. There's a scheme that would come into us that would say what was going to be on that. We would then consider that and we could approve or refuse. If we decided to approve it, they then have up until, I forget the second percentage now, I think it was around 87%. There were those 2 triggers. At the second trigger point, that then has to be ready to go. But we don't know what the detail of that sports facility as such would be. So it could be.
But my concern is they're going to come back and argue again. It's so deep into the development that they might come back and say, well, we'll build some houses instead. That concerns me. Also, what concerns me is the narrative in the text yet again about developers ripping hedges and trees out, where local residents have complained bitterly about it. And I understand that is being enforced against. That's the Panfield Lane site, yes. Do you know how many metres of hedge came out?
I don't know the meterage off the top of my head. I mean, the only thing I would urge caution with there, yes, it is being dealt with and enforced against, but it isn't part of this section
No,
106.
no,
so
I appreciate that. It's not pertinent to decision, but I just think it's worth mentioning in context. Yet again, I have to say, most developers are the same. Most developers treat nature appallingly badly. It's my observation and my recording over decades of what they do. And anyway, coming back to the issue. Okay, so that's very clear. The only thing I'd finally say is, and obviously I think we need to do this, I appreciate that, is careful what you wish for. I mean, I'm very aware of the Springfield Road, the Springfield Industrial Estate problem, because I do from time to time use the recycling centre at the end. And I know that you don't want to book any slots near 4 or 4:30 because you're going to be in there for an hour. So I do appreciate the point. The only thing I say is careful what you wish for. The cumulative housing on these two sites is what, 1,300, 1,400 plus employment. You're building a link road, but where will we be in 10, 20 years' time when all that development's built? Yeah. We could be back to square one in terms of traffic. This could be a temporary measure, but I do appreciate we have to do it.
Okay, the next person is Councillor Bowers, I have.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I'm pleased with getting somewhere, got to stage. I guess the first question you sort of got is, how have we got ourselves into this in the first place, in regards to the length of time it's taken? And I'm just concerned in regards how we deal with, or how breaches of Section 106 are dealt with. Because it's taken it so long to get to this stage. I'm conscious of the breach of the Section 106. From my understanding, from what you said, Tim, is Towland. So don't want to sort of. I know that's the next one, but I'm just conscious of reputational damage also in regards how developers are allowed to take advantage. And I just want to make sure that we are as strong as we can be when we have these situations. Because my concern is if we still get ourselves into a situation that this is not delivered in the 12 months. And can I just clarify, the 12 months is not from tonight's decision, that's from the signature of the variation. Yeah. So when is that liable to be? Because I think that is very, very important. And then also on the sports contribution, the community sports facility land, I just want to understand a little bit more about this, because my understanding is our suggested figure was just over 438,000. The Sports England plan pitch calculator, the number we're looking at tonight is 463,000 and a half, or just short of that. And I just want to make sure that from the information that we've got in the report that we do feel that that is going to be sufficient to meet the capital costs. Because I think that's the important thing. Or is it, and also connected to that, because that's the Sport England playing pitch calculator, and I take on board what you're saying about where bits are being delivered in other ways, does that mean that we cannot ask for more than that amount? Because I'm just conscious that we need clarification that full amount, which my understanding is the 463,424, will be enough to deliver what that is part of. And if I misunderstand any of that, please correct me, but I just want to make sure that we have the right numbers there, and whether we can ask for more or making sure that we're not leaving it short. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got some answers, and then Sarah may wish to add to those. With regards to how it's happened, I think actually it's fairly clear. When I went through the history and we had the original allocation for the 2011 core strategy, we had an allocation for one site, then the MPPF was released, and we had to bolt an extra site onto it rapidly to meet housing numbers. In an ideal planning world, what we would have done is a single allocation, and that would have knocked all this on the head at the outset, because you've got one allocation, one trigger, and the link road comes forward early. The problem became that you've got first strategic application that's way ahead in the process, a live planning application already in, and the second one a long way behind it, and you essentially can't withhold a planning consent. There's not grounds to withhold it. So that's why this has happened, that we've been forced into an allocation situation that's not normal in that respect. I think it's correct to say there are some lessons learned, but equally it's a bit of an unfortunate position to be kind of pushed into, I think. Section 106 enforcement, so that would be done via injunction. I think you were talking about the Towland site and the fact they're at 348 dwellings. Yeah, an injunction, Sarah may wish to add to this, but it is obviously a complex process. It's not the quickest process and the outcome's not guaranteed, but also there are two sides to it. We've got to balance housing delivery and the fact that if you injunct halfway through a site, it's obviously quite a serious thing to do because you're freezing that site. Sarah may wish to come back on that. But there is the injunction method. The 12 months, you're correct, it would be from the signature of the documents. The documents are really well advanced. One of the things that we wanted our solicitors to do is to work with the solicitors on the other side to get the documents as far advanced as possible so we could come to you with some certainty that if you approved this, you would then be positioning officers to move really quickly and to finish the job. So I can't put an exact time scale, but it wouldn't be a long time scale. If there was some delay of some sort, there's that mechanism within the delegated authority to then refuse. Obviously, we wouldn't want to get to that position, but there's a backstop, so it's not something that officers would allow to just drag on. The sports figure, would it be sufficient to meet the costs? Again, Sarah may wish to add to this. I suppose the short answer is yes, insofar as that Sport England's own calculation for what is sufficient to provide for this number of people from this size development. And it is correct to say that if that's what they're asking for, it's quite difficult to go above that, because what's the evidence for requesting over and above what the statutory provider is saying to us or the statutory constituency is saying to us, this is the amount you need. To go over and above that, I'm not quite sure how we would do that. Sarah might wish to add something.
Yeah, I mean, Tim's been very comprehensive, to be fair. Yeah, in terms of the short contribution, what you've got to remember is that we approved a planning permission with a bit of land that was going to provide something. So we can't now apply the modern Sport England calculator as if there isn't an existing planning permission. So that's why we've landed on the figure that we've landed on, but it is one that we are comfortable will provide what is intended to be provided. And just to cover off Councillor Abbott's point, in terms of what it could be in the future, well, theoretically, yes, this is off-site mitigation. So the amount of money that's been paid for a sport contribution is enough to be off-site mitigation. So yes, theoretically, it could come back as sport land, and that's what it would be required for. But yes, there's nothing to stop them coming back with something else. So you're right to be mindful of that, but what we have is enough to mitigate compared to what the site would have provided. In terms of injunction, the uncertainty around the injunction point, you would be injuncting Dandara not to occupy any more dwellings, so you'd be leaving the existing residents in an uncompleted development, and you may find that some of those residents would be very unhappy that the developer is not going to do any further works. So, you know, there is a balance to be struck. There is also a risk here that a judge might think that because they are unable to build the link road, that the injunction would not be reasonable. So the willingness of all of the developers to come to the table to negotiate a solution that does get the link road delivered is far preferable from using any of the formal enforcement tools we have available to us in this instance. But there are lessons learned that we will take back in terms of Section 106 in the future.
Tim, I think Councillor Bowers just asked about the timing for the deed of variation. I think it's in the report, but could you just respond to that point about how long it would take to complete the deed of variation?
Yeah, I think I did.
Sorry,
yeah.
Sorry, you did cover it. Sorry. So the next person, Councillor Bowers-Flint.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Where do I start? So this is, unfortunately or fortunately, my area of representation as a county councillor, and I can assure members that from day one that I was elected to today, all I get every day, phone calls, emails and everything, because the people who live in Panfield Lane have basically suffered far long enough, and this is embarrassing. And I have plagued the Cabinet Member for Planning. I've plagued the officers to deal with this, and Councillor Ritchie is quite correct in everything he said. Banging of heads, I think, comes to mind when we talk about this, and why has it taken us 10 years to get to this stage? However, I would like to put my thanks on record to Sarah Ashton and Dominic Collins, who have finally got some kind of agreement out of both of the developers. But those developers' names will stick in my head and many other people for the rest of my life, I think. I can't tell you what's happened to the people in Panfield Lane and how they've suffered. How they've suffered with the traffic, how they've suffered with continuous damage to their cars, how some of them can't even get their cars insured now because they've had that many claims on them, where they've been hit so many times because of the amount of traffic, etc., etc. Then at the top end of Panfield Lane, those people have suffered because people park right outside their houses, in their drives, blocking their drives, and they abandon their cars there and walk over the field to go to Springwood Industrial Estate to work, because it's a lot quicker to do that than it is to get onto the estate and get off of the estate. So whilst I hate every single thing about this, and obviously one of the developers can't count very well, which is really concerning, is that it's not the best of the situation. It's not what we wanted. We should never have got to this. And yes, it's right that lessons have been learned, and we need to think about this situation in the future, because it hasn't been pretty at all going along, and it's still not pretty now. But I think what we've got in front of us here is the best that officers have managed to get. Can I just ask for clarity? Because I think Sarah said, because I did ask the question, because I don't trust. There's no, all of the trust in me has gone completely out. So if this agreement was signed and the road still wasn't developed, is there not a clause somewhere that that road will still be built? I'm sure in the back of my head you did say something about it, because that's my biggest concern, because they can sign all the papers they want and still not do it, to be honest with you, because, like I said, the trust is completely gone. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's a backstop date where essentially 12 months from the date of the agreement being signed, the link road will be expected to be delivered, and that puts us in a better chance of taking, if we had to take enforcement action in the form of an injunction, that puts us in a better chance within a court, because we would be injuncting against a developer that has the ability to build the road.
Councillor Beavers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I didn't want to get into the complexities of Section 106s, because I've dealt with enough in my time as well. And I truly understand and appreciate the legal work that goes on. That must be at a great cost to us as a council as well. And I'm sure when this planning application originally came along, we never, and I've seen it in my own ward over the years, we never dreamt that, you know, this was going to come back to us in the way it has, and there must be an awful amount of legal fees now associated to this. What I do worry about, though, and it's the point made by Councillor Bowers-Flint actually, are the residents, because when these sorts of applications come forward, whole areas are written to, and they have an opportunity to engage in that. And I just wondered, on the back of what we might or might not agree with tonight, which hopefully will, solutions will be found, whether we actually write back to all of those people that are suffering along Panfield Lane and how that works. Because we ask them at the front end of all of this, but actually they're the ones that are suffering. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Could I just clarify, do you mean as in how the planning team, how we would respond to them? Okay. The answer is they'll be advised, if this goes through tonight, they'll be advised of the outcome, and that's it. So they would then understand the outcome. We wouldn't specifically contact, and we don't specifically go back to objectors. That's just not something that I don't think any planning department does.
I don't think anybody else wants to speak. I just want to echo the words that Councillor Bowers-Flint said, to thank Sarah and Dominic for all the hard work that they've put in place to try and bring this together, assuming that we're happy with it. And also the other comment I'd like to make is that obviously the failure to bring this site forward has affected our 5-year housing land supply, so it's affected everybody in the district, because we then have not had a 5-year housing land supply because housing hasn't come forward. So not just people in Panfield Lane. So would anybody like to, I think we've probably finished our debate, like to move this recommendation? Councillor Holland, are you moving that?
Yeah, I'd like to move off the recommendation that's set out in the report.
And we'll have a seconder, please. Anybody likes Councillor Fraser, second?
Second.
All those in favour of approving this other officer's recommendation? Thank you. Those against? And abstentions? So 2 abstentions. Thank you very much, members. That has been approved. That is on the first item. So we'll now have a brief debate, if we might, on the second Towlands item, which is the amendment to remove that restriction on the main number of dwellings. I think that's the main item there. Anybody like to just comment on that, please? Councillor Abbott.
Well, I think given it's a technical change really to mirror what we've just done, don't need to have a huge debate hopefully. But I think we're in the same position really. There's a degree of reluctance, but we've got to do it to move this thing forward.
Councillor Bowers.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chairman. I just wanted to just double check the piece around because obviously we're saying like the trust has gone with developers. About any of this probably coming to fruition. The subject, I think it's worded as the subject to contemporaneous completion. So basically what we're saying is if the other deed of variation that has just been voted on doesn't come to fruition within 12 months, this falls basically. So basically after that 12-month period from the signature, if that hasn't been delivered, then the 50 homes, the bit that here we are deleted, then automatically comes back into being. If we can just clarify that is what we're voting on tonight, exactly 12 months being delivered, then this gets reverted to how it was. And also just for clarification, can you just confirm, Tim, when it was, rough sort of date when Towlands were in breach of the Section 106, please?
Yeah, okay, so if I just start with the 12 months, so some of that's correct and some of it wasn't. So the 12-month date relates to the time span, the backstop, i.e. how long the developer has to deliver the link road. So if you approve this tonight, the officer team, we go away, we supervise the signing of the agreements, and our solicitor, the contemporaneous bit comes down to our solicitor, so they're the ones in charge of it, and they make sure that both agreements complete simultaneously, because we don't want to release one and not hold the other. It needs to be done at exactly the same moment, but we would be in control of that completely. So that's the first point. The 12 months then kicks in, that's the agreement's then signed, 12-month period starts, and they have to deliver the link road within the 12 months. If they don't do it within the 12 months, you're then back in an enforcement position, and that's where it would be an injunction, and the injunction would be against the Panfield developer who hadn't delivered the link road. It's probably worth mentioning, it's for context, there is also obviously this commercial agreement. I don't know what the enforcement mechanisms would be. That is not a planning matter, but clearly if money's being transferred, there's going to be a private sector enforcement matter as well. But I'll mention that as an aside just for context, but for us it's the injunction and the breach of 106 agreement that's the bit that we would deal with, and that's our important bit.
Yeah.
Before you come back on the other piece, Tim, so just for clarification, so if that doesn't get delivered, then the Panfield Lane site is in breach. So what happens to Towlands then? Because literally if there's then an injunction against Panfield Lane because they're in breach after the 12 months, then Towlands seem to have got away with it again, because literally they've got away with it tonight, maybe that's the wrong term, in regards to getting rid of the 50 homes that they was in breach of initially. So, and then I suppose it's just getting to an understanding of what does that mean, and also does that mean, because there's an injunction there, what does that happen to Towlands?
So essentially, the obligation would no longer be in place for Towlands. So they are. So what? But they're not going to pay Hills and Mersey, the developer for Panfield Lane, the money towards the link road being built unless they're free of their obligation. So they're not being they are being let off in planning terms, but there is commercial agreement sitting behind this that is them funding the link road so that the link road will be accelerated. Just to remind you that the developer for Panfield is not actually in breach of that 50 limit. So they're not required at this moment in time to build the link road. Dandara are, but they have no ability to build the link road because it's not on their land. So it is an unusual circumstance, and I appreciate that. That's why we're sort of trying to explain it as simply as possible. But essentially, releasing this obligation means that money will be passed via the commercial agreement from one developer to another to allow for the link road to be accelerated, and then the enforcement mechanism for the local planning authority in relation to the link road sits with one developer, and that developer is the developer that owns the land.
And I'm right in thinking, am I, Sarah, that the commercial agreement is conditional on the link road being built, so there's obviously something, although it's not a planning issue.
Yeah, it's not a planning issue. The commercial agreement, I think, is dealing with the transfer of funds.
Okay, thanks.
Still waiting for Tim's going to come back on.
Yeah, I was just going to come back on the time. So, yeah, in terms of time, I don't remember exactly. I'm going to say between 2 to 3 years, sometime. So the question is, why so long? The answer is because of the difficulties of an injunction that we've already discussed, but also because the first port of call for the Towlands developer was to try and find highway mitigation. So originally their intention was to bring a section 106A in front of the committee that showed highway mitigation measures, and that if that had been successful, that would have dealt with the matter. It didn't come before committee because the recommendation from the county council ended up being negative, i.e. they couldn't support measures, but it took a long time for that piece of work to be done. The outcome was that there was no mitigation that could be done that would be good enough for us to recommend approval and bring before you, but that took time.
Yes, please do.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, the last thing I'd like to say is, and I appreciate all the information that Tim and Sarah both provided in this in regards the injunction piece about whether you do it or whether you don't do it, and taking everything into consideration. But I'd also, and I take on board the point was made about people that are already living on the site and that kind of thing. But also we do need to compare that with, or take into consideration, the residents in Panfield Lane as well. I know we're not comparing one to the other, but at the end of the day we can't. We have to obviously go for something that we feel that's going to be successful, but we do need to take into consideration the residents of Panfield Lane as much as those that already live on that site. So I feel that needs to be taken into consideration. Hopefully we don't get to that stage, but I think that just needs to be, that point needs to be made as well. Thank you.
Yes, fair point, Councillor Bowers. Anybody else like to say anything on this application? In which case, could somebody move the officer's recommendation? Councillor Abbott, and seconded Councillor Holland. So all those in favour of officer's recommendation. Those against? Abstentions? 3 abstentions. Okay, thank you very much, members. That officer's recommendation has been approved. So we have one more item this evening. This is item, it's a tree preservation order application. This is application, items number 6A, application number 25 /02725 TPO. This is in the open space at the land rear of Tabor House, Coggeshall Road, Braintree. And Tim, are you doing this one?
Yes, thank you. If I could just have a second to screen share it. Okay. So this is a application for works to TPO trees, and it's on council-owned land, and in fact it's on Weavers Park, which is obviously just behind this building, just to the front of this building. which is why it's before planning committee. Site location plan, we all know where Weavers Park is. The trees are located primarily around the edge of the park, although there are some that are further into the park. Context, as I said, council is the applicant. The trees with works proposed are subject to a preservation order, which is referenced from 1991. With the exception of 4 trees, the numbers of which are given there, the trees are all reasonable specimens with good visibility and are considered to offer relatively high amenity value. The 4 that are specifically numbered there are dead trees, and their removal is proposed. That's in line with good arboricultural practice. Replacement trees are considered to be unsuitable in this situation. Site layout, just really to show where the trees are. Most of them, as I said, are around the periphery of the park. Southern half of the park here. The tree officers have helpfully set out the bulk of works of trees in photos. So first one is a sycamore which is dead. Removals in line with good practice. Replacement planting is not suitable in this instance, so you have the sycamore tree. Then we have what's described as an unknown species, although they assume it's an elm. That's also dead, so again, it's good practice to remove it, and replacement planting is not suitable in this instance. Next one is a sycamore, multi-stemmed with failure at the base of the tree. Again, removal in line with good arboricultural practice. Replacement planting not suitable. The next ones are 3 trees that are lime trees. There's nothing wrong with these trees. They're due to have a canopy reduction of up to 2 to 3 metres and a canopy lift of up to 5 metres over the roadway. So that is about the management of those trees, keeping them in good health, particularly given their location in a high-profile, high-trafficked area, as in foot traffic. The next one is a lime tree. This is due to have a canopy reduction to clear a view for a CCTV camera. Again, the reduction would be in line with good arboricultural practice, and on the right you can just see that red line which the tree officers put on there to indicate where the extent of the works would run to. Next one is cedar tree, which is just outside there. I'm sure everyone's familiar with that. Due to have a branch cut back, one with a historical snap out by up to 2 metres to reduce the potential for failure, and also for it to be braced at 2/3 distance from the union to the top of the canopy, which is in line with good practice. Obviously that's a safety concern, so making sure that the safety and longevity of the tree is secured. Then the next one is an oak tree, due to have a canopy lift to give a clear view for a CCTV camera. On the left-hand photo, the tree officers just put these red marks that hopefully you can see. It's where my cursor's hovering. That's where the extent of the lift would run to. So the trees for canopy lifts, we ran through the bulk of them there. They're all numbered specifically. The dead trees we ran through, and the reason for their removal is clear. And then there are multiple other tree works which are minor maintenance works, such as the canopy lifting we've run through, but there's also the removal of dead wood and ivy management. So the remaining trees, i.e. not the 4 dead ones, have a need for these works to maintain them within their setting and to retain them for future enjoyment. So overall, the officer recommendation is for approval in accordance with the approved plans and documents, subject to the conditions and informatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. With Councillor Basvint.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Because I'm not no tree specialist, all I know is trees are lovely in the right places and awful in the wrong places. And this place seems ideal for them. So, because I don't understand, Tim, can you just explain to me why we're removing a tree but then being told that replacement planting is not suitable? Because to me, being not knowing anything about it is ideal for being replaced. Thank you.
Thank you. I can only answer on my general understanding, which is in terms of the location of those trees. From the photos, we could see that wasn't ideal. I can't answer why it's not appropriate to plant generally in the park, although I can say that we've obviously got our tree strategy, and I can take that point away to tree officers and just say in general on these types of applications, if they're saying it's not suitable, can they give a bit more context about the tree strategy, etc.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Couple of things. My understanding of TPOs has always been that you don't actually need to relax them in order to deal with the 3Ds, whether it's dead, dangerous or diseased. So to some extent, I was slightly surprised that we've got the detail around trees. If they're dead, they're also dangerous, especially with the one covered in ivy, which of course has year-round sail prospects to catch the wind and blow the thing over. So that slightly puzzled me. So maybe you can explain why I don't understand this properly. The other thing is to do with limes on your slide number 9, where there's 2 pictures, 3 limes in total. Clearly from these pictures you get significant epicormic growth down at the bottom of them when you cut them back. If you're, I've had a lime tree in my garden at least of these proportions. I know how fast they come back. If you're going to cut one back at the highway, is there an ongoing management plan to make sure it doesn't immediately spring back and compromise the highway again? Thanks very much.
Thank you. So just taking them in turn, I think the answer to the dead, dying and dangerous, you're quite right, and I think the reason it was in there was just for completeness, so that from the sort of public perception, we're seen to be all tree works are going through the system, as it were. So I think that's why, but you are quite right. In theory, we could just do those. The limes, the management plan, my general understanding is that all the trees in our parks, because of the risk associated with them, they all have a management plan. I can't offer any detail on it other than to say that the tree officers are actively trying to manage tree stock. So I would be as sure as I can be that there is a management plan for all of our trees.
Councillor Abbott.
Thank you. So I was waiting to see the pictures of the dead trees to suggest that we might keep one of them if it was in a suitable location as a dead monolith, because they're fantastic for wildlife. But having seen the pictures, I won't suggest that because they're not suitable. The cedar tree, yeah, cedar wood is incredibly heavy and dense, and if a branch falls, well, is it Southend? There was a disaster, wasn't there? The density of the wood's incredible. Even a moderate-sized branch can cause a lot of damage to a person. So I can understand why a safety first approach needs to be taken with that. All the others seem very sensible. On the epicormic growth, I wish County would take the same approach to BDC. So County has got quite a lot of lime trees in Silverend and Witham, which I'm very familiar with. And every single year we have to ask for the epicormic growth to be taken off, instead of them just having, you know, a spreadsheet saying, right, June time, folks, let's get out and take the epicormic growth off. Every year we have to ask for the same trees to be trimmed back. And they're lovely street trees. I know there are a lot of work limes, but they are nice street trees. So, yes, I've got no problem with any of these works. I think they're all very sensible, and I welcome what officers said about belt and braces, you know, that we're being open about what we're doing as an authority. Final point on the planting, I agree with what Councillor Bowes-Flint said. And, of course, now we have a budget. We didn't have a budget this year, so we have money for tree planting. So if that could be fed back to tree officers, we'd like to be planting some more, please.
Good point, Councillor Abbott. Yeah. Okay, anybody else wish to say anything? Probably not. Okay, we'll have somebody to move officers' recommendation. Councillor Holland. Seconded Councillor Bowes-Flint. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much, members. And that brings us to the end of our meeting this evening. Thank you.